Wah, sudah ada yang datang juga nih.
Gimana nih?
Kita perkenalkan dulu lah ini ya. Ada Neng Ganis, ada panggilnya Pak Bebek
Gimana
apa?
harapan kalian buat PS5 nanti?
Wah, luar biasa langsung.
Ya.
Ya kayak fitur-fitur apa aja nanti di PS5. Maksudnya kayak kalau Xbox udah tau lah ya.
Ada yang mau nanya silakan nih sama Bapak-bapak. Oh, sudah mulai. Countdown.
Sudah mulai, guys.
1 menit 50 detik.
Di set 480. Gue nonton di ini juga.
Lu nonton di mana?
Gue nonton di PC, tapi takut berisik. Jadi gue kayak nonton di ini aja. Di iPad aja. Kan nih. Tuh, keluar Sony PLN.
Template YouTube banget beneran deh.
Iya, YouTube aja tuh.
So, defaultnya ini, defaultnya.
Gak ada custom apa.
Gak ada custom.
Oh, nih, kira-kira gimana speknya nih? Akankah lebih gres dari Xbox? Akankah?
Kayaknya sama.
Kalau gue bilang, iya, malah bisa di bawahnya.
Malah bisa di bawahnya.
Aku rasa di bawahnya sih. Biasanya sih gitu ya.
Iya, benar-benar.
Tapi nggak akan jauh beda, maksudnya kayak ya performa tetap aja sama. Cuman kalau dari segi hardware-nya pasti kayak Xbox tuh lebih juara gitu. Biasanya sih gitu ya.
Iya. Cuma kalau ngikutin si yang generasi sebelumnya sih.
Nah, itu gimana tuh?
Sama PS4 kan, PS4 memang lebih tinggi kan speknya.
Iya.
Yang model awalnya, yang model
awal. 10 detik. 5 detik.
Yo, iya.
4, 3, 2, 1.
Gede-gede gitu.
0.
Hi.
Oh iya, bener, recording.
Yeah. That we had planned for GDC. But we do have some super exciting news about PS5. And who better to bring that to you than the one and only Mark Cerny. Without further ado, over to you, Mark.
Thank you, Jim. There will be lots of chances later on this year to look at the PlayStation 5 games. Today, I want to talk a bit about our goals for the PlayStation 5 hardware and how they influence the development of the console. I think you all know, I'm a big believer in console generations. Once every 5 or 6 or 7 years, a console arrives with substantially new capabilities. There's a lot of learning by the game developers, hopefully not too overwhelming, and soon there's games that could never have been created before. Now, it used to be that as a console designer, you'd somehow intuit what would be the best set of capabilities for the new console, and then build it in complete secrecy. For the PlayStation consoles, that period lasted through PlayStation 3, a powerful and groundbreaking console, but also one that caused quite a lot of heartache, as it was initially difficult to develop games for. So, starting with PlayStation 4, we've taken a different approach, roughly centered around 3 principles. The first of these is listening to the developers.
Dan karena push to talk juga.
What we put into the console derives directly from the needs and aspirations of the game creators. We definitely do have some ideas of our own, but at the core of our philosophy for designing consoles is that game players are here for the fantastic games, which is to say that game creators matter. Anything we can do to make life easier for the game creators or help them realize their dreams, we will do. So, about once every 2 years, I take a tour of the industry. I go to the various developers and publishers, sit down, and discuss how they're doing with the current consoles and what they'd like to see in future consoles. This requires weeks on the road, as reaching the bulk of the game creators involves talking to well over 100 people at something like 24 publishers and developers. And it is incredibly valuable. By the way, the feature most requested by the developers, that was an SSD, which we were very happy to put in the hardware, but a lot of problem solving was required. I'll be doing a deep dive on the
Kayaknya nggak cuma
SSD
developer doang,
and
kita sebagai
surrounding
gamer
systems later on
juga
in
butuh ya.
this talk.
Aha.
It's also key to make a generational leap while keeping the console sufficiently familiar to game developers. I think about this in terms of balancing evolution and revolution. Now, with PlayStation 1, 2, and 3, the target was a revolution each time with a brand new feature set. That was great in many ways, but time for the developers to get up and running got longer with each console. In the past, I've called this time to triangle. Here's what I had for those 3 consoles. To be clear, I'm not talking about time to make a game. Developers will be ambitious, and it may take them 6 years or so to realize their vision. What I'm talking about is that dead time before graphics and other aspects of game development are up and running, and trying to minimize that. On the other hand, if we're trying to reduce that dead time to 0, that means the hardware architecture can't change at all. We're handcuffed. We need to judge for each feature what value it adds and whether it's worth the increase in developer time needed to support it. So with PlayStation 4, we were able to strike a pretty good balance between performance and familiarity. We got required learning back to PlayStation 1 levels. With PS5, the GPU was definitely the area we felt the most tension between adding new features and keeping a familiar programming model. Ultimately, I think we've ended up with something under a month of getting up to speed. That feels like we're striking about the right balance. I'll go into a bit more detail later today about our philosophy with the GPU and the specific feature set that resulted from it. It's also very important for us, as the hardware team, to find new dreams, by which I mean something other than CPU performance, GPU performance, and the amount of RAM. The increase in graphics performance over the past 2 decades has been astonishing, but there are other areas in which we can innovate and provide significant value to the game creators, and through them, the players. That's why the SSD was very much on our list of directions to explore, regardless of what came out of the conversations with game developers and publishers. The biggest feature in this category is the custom engine for audio. That's today's final topic. The push for vastly improved audio, and in particular, 3D audio, isn't something that came out of the developer meetings. It's much more the case that we had a dream of what might be possible 5 years from now, and then worked out a number of steps we could take to set us on that path. So here again are the 3 principles, the first being enabling the desires of developers to drive the hardware design. To me, the SSD really is the key to the next generation. It's a game changer. And it was the #1 ask from developers for PlayStation 5. As in, we know it's probably impossible, but can you put an SSD in it? That was a discussion we were also having internally. It was clear that the presence of a hard drive in every PlayStation 4 was having a positive impact. A lot of things that would simply have been impossible at Blu-ray disc speeds were now possible. At the same time, though, in 2015 and 2016, when we were having these conversations, developers were already banging up against the limits of the hard drive, and a lot of developer time was being spent designing around slow load speeds. I want to focus in on just one number here, which is how long it takes to load a gigabyte of data from a hard drive. The difficulty being that hard drives are neither particularly fast nor flexible. If all your data is in one block, which is frankly not very likely, you can load 50 to 100 megabytes a second, depending on where the data is located on the hard drive. Let's assume it's on the outer edge, which means loading a gigabyte takes 10 seconds. If you compress your game packages, you can fit more data on the Blu-ray disc and also effectively boost your hard drive read speed by the compression ratio. We support zlib decompression on PlayStation 4.
Thank you for follow,
Something like
X
50%
Wheels.
more data on the disc
Welcome.
and 50% higher effective read speed. Unfortunately, though, it's highly likely that your data is scattered around in various files on the hard drive, as well as sourced from multiple locations
selamat datang.
files. So lots
Thank
of
you udah
scenes
follow
are
ya.
rated at 2 to 50-ish milliseconds each. My rule of thumb is that the hard drive is spending 2/3 of its time seeking, and only 1/3
Nah,
of its
kita
time actually
akan mendengarkan dulu nih.
Putting all of that together, a gigabyte is very roughly 20 seconds to load from a hard drive. Now, a gigabyte is not much data. Games are using 5 or 6 gigabytes of RAM on PlayStation 4, so boot times and load times can get pretty grim. Or to put that differently, as a player, you wait for the game to boot, wait for the game to load, Wait for the level to reload every time you die, and you wait for what is euphemistically called fast travel. And all of that leads to the dream. What if we could have not just an SSD, but a blindingly fast SSD? If we could load 5 gigabytes a second from it, what would change? Now, SSDs are completely different from hard drives. They don't have seeks as such. If you have a 5 gigabyte a second SSD, you can read data from 1,000 different locations in that second. Pretty much it's
Lebih tinggi dari Xbox ya?
As for time to load a gigabyte, this is next gen we're talking about, so memory is bigger. Instead, we should be asking how long to load 2
Peluru
gigabytes.
pertama
And the
ditembak.
answer is about a quarter of a second. I mean, that's amazing. We're talking 2 orders of magnitude, meaning very roughly 100 times faster. Which means at 5 gigabytes a second for the SSD, the potential is that there are no load screens.
Yeah.
A half dozen gigabytes and fades back up again. Same for a reload. You're immediately back in the action after you die. And fast travel becomes so fast in a blink and you miss it. As game creators, we go from trying to distract the player from how long fast travel is taking, like those Spider-Man subway rides, to being so blindingly fast.
Actually udah pernah nonton yang cuplikan Spider-Man di render pakai PS5.
But for me, this is not the primary reason to change from a hard drive to an SSD. The primary reason for an ultra-fast SSD is that it gives the game designer freedom. Or to put that differently, with a hard drive, the 20 seconds that it takes to load a gigabyte can sabotage the game that the developer is trying to create. I think almost all of us in the room have experienced this, maybe in different ways. Say we're making an adventure game and we have 2 rich environments where we each want enough textures and models to fill memory. Which you can do as long as you have a long staircase or elevator ride.
Oh iya Kazu, itu udah confirm barusan ya, kalau pasti pakai SSD. Dan iya benar, cuplikan yang Spider-Man di render sama PS5 itu ada di Twitter, banyak banget di sosmed.
Game design
And then do some calculations with sight lines and run speeds, like we did for Haven City when we were making Jack 2. The game is 20 years old, but not much has changed since then. All those twisty passages are there for a reason. There's a whole subset of level design dedicated to this sort of work, but still, it's a giant distraction for a team that just wants to make their game. So when I talked about the dream of an SSD, part of the reason for that 5 gigabyte a second target was to eliminate loads, but also part of the reason for
Tadi
that
sudah dijawab sih ininya.
As in, what if the SSD is so fast that as the player is turning around, it's possible to load textures for everything behind the player in that split second? If you figure that it takes half a second to turn, that's 4 gigabytes of compressed data you can load. That sounds about right for next gen. Anyway, back to the hard drive. Another strategy for increasing effective read speed is to make big sequential chunks of data. For example, we might group all the data together for each city block. That removes most of the seeks, and the streaming gets faster. But there's a downside too, which is that frequently used data is included in many chunks and therefore is on the hard drive many, many times. Marvel's Spider-Man uses this strategy, and though it works very well for increing the streaming speed,
kalau dia si ungu ganti biru jadi Windows nih.
duplication as a result. Some of the objects on the hard drive 400 times. What I'm describing here are things that cramp a creative director's style. Either level design gets a little bit boring in places, or the data is duplicated so many times that it no longer fits on the Blu-ray disc. And you end up with hard limits on the player's run speed or driving speed. The player can't go faster than the load speed from the hard drive. And finally, I'm sure many of you have noticed that after a patch download, a PlayStation 4 will sometimes take a long time to install the patch. That's because when just part of a file has been changed, the new data can be downloaded pretty quickly. But before the game boots up, a brand new file has to be constructed that includes the changed portion. Otherwise, every change would add a seek or 2. Even so, you can occasionally see this happening on game titles. They start to hitch once they get patched enough. With an SSD, though, no seeks, so no need to make brand new files with the changes incorporated into them, which means no installs as you know them today. There's yet one more benefit, which is that system memory can be used much more efficiently. On PlayStation 4, game data on the hard drive feels very distant and difficult to use. By the time you realize you need a piece of data, it's much too late to go out and load it. So system memory has to contain all of the data that could be used in the next 30 seconds or so of gameplay. That means a lot of the 8 gigabytes of system memory is idle. It's just waiting there to be potentially used. On PlayStation 5, though, the SSD is very close to being like more RAM. Typically, it's fast enough that when you realize you need a piece of data, you can just load it from the SSD and use it. There's no need to have lots of data parked in system memory waiting to potentially be used. A different way
Ramenya sama kayak
is that
Xbox.
most of RAM is working on the game's behalf. This is one of the reasons that 16 gigabytes of GDDR6 feels right for PlayStation 5. The presence of the SSD reduces the need for a massive intergenerational increase.
Teknis banget ya, tapi ya.
So,
Luar biasa.
SSD. Here's the set of targets. Boot the game in a second.
Tapi kitanya jadi ngerti
No load
sih.
screens. Design freedom,
Daripada
meaning
baca.
no twisted passages.
Iya.
or
Cuman
Aku
lihat
baca
tuh
paling-
settingan
more
zet
game on
tuh.
the disk, more game on the SSD. And finally, those patch installs.
Pada
go away.
ngantuk.
The reality,
Yang mau
though, is
nitip
that the
absen
SSD
tinggal
is
kasih
Inilah
tahu.
belajaran dikit lah,
There's
belajar
a lot of
dikit
places
kita.
where bottlenecks can
Belajar
occur
dikit.
between the
Lumayan
SSD
kuliah
Kayak
gratis
and the
online.
game code that uses the
Kuliah
disk.
gratis ini.
You can see this on PlayStation 4. If I use an
Iya,
SSD
kayaknya ini
with
acara
10
emang bener
times the speed
buat
of the
ditaruh di
standard hard drive, I probably see only double the loading speed, if that. For PlayStation 5, our goal was not just that the SSD itself be 100 times faster. It was that game loads and streaming would be 100 times faster. So every single potential bottleneck needed to be addressed.
Oh.
And there are a lot of them. Let's look at check-in and what happens when its overhead gets 100 times larger.
Gimana ya?
Conceptually,
Mau
check-in
bikin
is a pretty
unnecessary
simple
response,
process. Data is
ilmu
loaded
juga.
into system
Ntar
memory from the
ketinggalan.
hard drive or
Nggak bisa
SSD.
belajar.
It's examined. A few
Gimana
values
gak
are
nih seorang
tweaked to check
teknik?
it in, and then it's moved.
Wah, ini dia.
Lagi kuliah online dulu.
At the SSD speeds we're talking about.
Kuliah
that last
online
part,
again.
Moving the data, meaning copying
Berlanjut.
from one location to another, takes roughly an entire
Tapi dari AD gitu
next-gen
yang paling
CPU
tahu
core.
teknis
And
tuh
that's just the
Danis.
tip of the iceberg. If all
Hmm.
the overheads get 100 times
Paling
larger,
apa?
that will cripple the frame rate as soon
Paling
as
tahu
the
teknis.
and that massive stream of data starts coming off the SSD.
Sama Abel
So to
sih.
solve all of that, we built a lot
Enggak,
of
gua nggak
custom
tahu.
hardware, namely a custom flash controller
Secara
and a
teori
number
sih
of
aku
custom
ngerti.
units in our main chip. The flash controller in the SSD was
Intinya,
designed
kalau
for
mau
smooth
disingkat,
and bottleneck
semua presentasi ini
operation.
bilang,
Also,
ini semua dari tadi
for example,
semua
there are 6 levels of
nge-convey
priority.
penjelasan SSD sebenarnya.
Priority
Kalau
is
mau
very
dirangkum ya.
important. You can imagine
Iya.
players
Dan
walking
bedanya
into
dari
some new
PS
location
sebelumnya.
in the world and being requested a few
Chat saya
things
pun
checked.
kemasukan
And while
Resident
those
Sleeper
textures are
ya.
reloaded, an enemy is shot and has to speak a few dying
Tidak
words.
dapat
Having
dihindari.
multiple priority levels lets the audience use dying
Sudah dia
words
jelasin
get
itu
loaded
sama
immediately. On one
Cuman
side,
di
that
stream
flash
ini bisa
controller
ngelihat
connects to
banjir
actual
chat.
flash
Nih
drives
kita lihat ya.
supplied to store.
Kita geser
To
dikit.
reach our bandwidth target of 5 gigabytes a second, we ended up with a 12-channel interface. 8 channels wouldn't be enough. The resulting
Lihat
bandwidth
seberapa
we
banyak
achieved is
channel yang
5
zet di situ ya.
gigabytes a second. With a 12-channel interface, the most natural
Oh,
size
C sekali
of
Dras.
is 825 gigabytes.
Mantap.
The key question for us was, is that enough? I mean, it's tempting to add more, but Flash certainly doesn't come cheap, and we have a responsibility to our gaming audience to be cost-effective with regards to what we put in the console.
Oke.
Ultimately, we
Kenapa
resolved
di
this
YouTube
question
juga?
by looking at the play patterns of a broad range of gamers. We examined the specific games that they were playing over the course of a weekend or a week or a month, and whether that set of games would fit properly on the SSD. We were able to establish that the friction caused by reinstalls or redownloads would be quite low, and so we locked in on that 825 gigabyte size, while also preparing multiple strategies so that those who want more storage can add it.
Kan live stream Pak Kazu.
Nggak ada, nggak
Back
ada.
to the flash
dicepetin.
controller. On the other side, it connects to our main custom chip via 4 lanes of Gen 4 PCIe. And inside
Apa
the
nih?
main custom chip is
8025
a pretty hefty
giga.
unit.
Oh.
dedicated
Custom
to
chip
RAM.
dalam
Before we
PCIe.
talk about what that does, let's talk compression for a moment. PlayStation 4 used zero.
Nah,
latency
ini dia
compression.
nih.
We decided to use it again on PlayStation 5, but on my 2017 tour of developers, I learned about a new format called Kraken from Rad Game.
Dan zet.
It's like Xero's
Waduh,
smarter cousin.
ini ya.
Simple, Similar types of
Jadi di sini ada yang tadi pagi baru kuliah online kayak gini juga. Sekarang harus nonton kayak gini juga.
Kraken had only been out for a year, but it was already becoming a de facto industry standard. Half of the teams I talked to were either using it or getting ready to evaluate it. So we hustled.
Jadi ini ada yang kuliahnya jadi kuliah online juga.
Oh.
Nah,
Kirain
input data.
jadi isinya Xbox.
After decompression, that typically becomes 8 or 9 gigabytes. But the unit itself is capable of outputting as much as 22 gigabytes a second if the data happen to
tepatnya terpaksa e-learning karena ini kuliah di lockdown.
equates to 9 of our Zen 2 cores. That's what it would take to decompress Kraken stream with a conventional CPU. There's a lot more in the custom
Gue juga mau kalau kuliahnya kayak gini.
including a dedicated DMA controller. The game can direct exactly where it wants to send the data coming off of the
Ujung-ujungnya ngobrol
SSD.
sama teman sebelah
This
sih.
equates to
Kayak kita
another
sekarang.
Zen 2 core or 2 in terms of its copy performance. Its primary purpose is to remove check-in as a bottleneck. There's 2 dedicated I/O coprocessors and a large RAM pool. These aren't Zen 2 cores. They're there principally to direct the variety
bener
of
nih,
custom
teknis
hardware
banget
around them.
Iya.
One of the coprocessors is dedicated
Dan
to
ini 20 menit loh.
This lets us bypass traditional file I/O and its bottlenecks when reading from the SSD. The other is responsible for memory mapping, which I know doesn't sound like anything related to the SSD, but a lot of developers map and remap memory as part of file I/O, and this too.
Ini emang seperti pengantar tidur ini sebenarnya.
Coherency engines to assist the
Relaxing.
coherency comes up a lot.
Lihat deh, suaranya renyah kan?
Coherency issue is still data.
Iya sih.
Ini dari tadi udah sayup-sayup sih.
All of the GPU caches whenever they
Emang bener sih butuh di-react nih biar semangat ini biar bangun. Perlu di-overlay dengan suara-suara begini nih.
We've implemented a gentler way of doing things.
Jadi
Where
gimana
the
kita mau
coherency
discuss dengan
engines
tuh
inform the
I/O
GPU of the
coprocessor.
overwritten address and custom scrubbers in several dozen GPU
Jadi
caches
gimana
to
perkembangan
pinpoint
dengan
evictions
coherency
of just
engines
those
dengan
address.
Last of Us 2?
The best thing is, as a game developer, when you read from the SSD, you don't need to know any of this. You don't even need to know.
PS5 ASMR.
You just indicate
Mo,
what data
ini
you want
melanjutkan kuliah pagi.
and where you'd like to put it.
Lihat tuh emot. Wah kecewa banget sih kalau nggak ada desain reveal sih.
Back to the dream.
Kayak-
Ternyata di sini buat SSD doang.
Gila juga. Cuman bro. Iya ngerti. Cepet SSD tuh cepet ngerti.
SSD. Oke, buat nyimpen data udah.
Having said that, expandability of our SSD is
legal,
going to be
PS5
quite
ASMR.
important. Flash is costly, and you may very well want to add storage to whatever we put in the console.
Ini ASMR
Now,
Max Ernie
the
nih.
kind
Kapan
of
lagi
storage
kan
you
20 menit
need
kita
depends on
dengerin.
how you're going to
Emang
use it.
butuh ditonton bareng-bareng nih biar nggak ketiduran nih.
Iya, kalau sendiri
You'd
tuh
like to take advantage of backwards compatibility.
Wah, ini
to play
aku
those
udah
games on
tinggalin
PlayStation
ini kalau
5,
udah nonton
then
sendiri
a
nih.
large external hard drive is ideal. You can leave your games on the hard drive and play them directly from there, thus saving the pricier SSD storage for your PlayStation 5 titles.
Iya,
Or you can
eksternal
copy your
SSD
active
ini
PlayStation 4
seharusnya
titles
persekannya
to the
dia
SSD.
motor ya. PS5
If your
SSD
purpose in
55
adding more
GB,
storage is to play
kenceng.
PlayStation 5 titles, though, ideally you would add
Sabar,
to your
Iya
SSD
men,
storage.
presentasi pamer pindah ADD ke SDD 20 menit nih kalau bisa dilihat ya.
Sama
sama kayak Xbox.
Nih ya, ini karena stream ini saya kendalikan, jadi saya bisa bebas nih ya. Lihat tuh, 22 menit dia cuman bahas ini. Lihat di chat di sebelah sini ya, semuanya z.
Ya cuma memang nggak mungkin juga sih. Ya nggak mungkin juga game
Perlu
PS5
banget
di
nih.
ADD sekarang.
Pasti bakalan lama sih
That
loadingnya ya.
universal drive has to be at least as fast
Iya,
as ours.
iya, benar-benar.
Games that rely
Emang
on the speed of our SSD
gimana ya,
need to
emang
work
nggak bisa
flawlessly
digabung
with
nggak sih
any M2
datanya tuh?
Kayaknya
Karena
ini
data
When I
yang
gave the
kan
wired
data game
interview
yang
last
dibikin
year,
untuk
I said
PS5
that the
itu
PlayStation
kayak
5
khusus buat
SSD
SSD
was
banget.
faster than
Iya.
anything available on
Oh,
PC.
make sense.
At the
Cuma
time,
di sini-
commercial M2
Di sini
drives
game
used
PS4 bisa
PCIe
ditaruh di
4.0,
SSD.
and 4 lanes of that capped
Eh,
out
apa nih,
at
guys?
2.5 gigabytes a second.
Ini kayaknya mau
In other
ngomongin
words, no PCIe
SSD yang
3.0
yang
can
biasa
hit the required
sama yang
spec.
PS5.
M2 drives with PCIe 4.0 are now out in the market. We're getting our samples and seeing 4 or 5 gigabytes a second from them.
Tetap
By
ini
year's end,
comparing
there
kayak
were
prosesor.
drives that saturate
Mungkin Neng
4.0
Ganis bisa
with
menjelaskan ini kepada
7
penonton.
gigabytes a second. Having
Ini
said that,
kayaknya
we
dia
are
mau
comparing
kayak
apples and
ngomongin
oranges though, because that
SSD
commercial
yang
M2 drive will have
biasa
its
bisa
own
nggak sih
architecture,
buat
its own flash
PS5 gitu
controller,
loh.
and so on.
I
Kayaknya ya.
see.
The NVMe specification lays out a priority scheme for requests
Oh,
that
ini
the M2
compatibility
drives
nih.
can use. And that scheme is pretty nice, but it only has 2 true priority levels. Our drive supports 6. We can hook up a drive with only 2 priority levels, definitely, but our custom I/O unit has to arbitrate the extra priority rather than the M2 drive's flash controller. And so the M2 drive needs a little extra speed to take care of issues arising from the different approach. That commercial drive also needs to physically fit inside of the bay we created in PlayStation 5 for M2 drives. Unlike internal hard drives, there's unfortunately no standard for the height of an
Sorry
M2
ya.
drive. And some
Mana
M2 drives
saya
have
nyangka
giant
kalau
heatsinks.
teknisnya
Bilang
begini,
ngomong ini,
tapi
bilang thank you for watching.
Right now we're getting M2 drives.
tuh kan fiturnya tadi bener tuh Pak Kazu, harus dicepetin deh 1,5 kali kan.
We'll also be doing some compatibility testing to make sure that the architecture of particular M2 drives isn't too foreign for the games to handle. Once we've done that compatibility testing, we should be able to start letting you know which drives will physically fit and which drive samples have benchmarked appropriately high in our testing. It would be great if that happened by launch, but it's likely to be a bit past it. So please hold off on getting that M2 drive until you hear from us. Okay, back to our principles. Balancing evolution
Baru
and
balik ke
revolution
sini,
is
oke.
the second of them. This was definitely a recurring theme with the GPU.
Kayaknya ini tidak sesuai dengan harapan
We
nih.
need more features and capabilities. If we only have more performance, it's not really a new generation of console. Of course, many of these capabilities result in performance. That's part of why a PlayStation 5 teraflop is more powerful than a PlayStation 4 teraflop. But we aren't just seeking performance. We also need the ability to do something with the GPU that could not have been
Terlalu
done
banyak
before.
feel.
And we need higher performance. Every time we double the performance of some GPU component, we
Dari
don't
24
we've doubled the power consumed and the heat produced.
Dari 24 menit yang lalu rangkumannya
Iya,
sama loh ini.
Hitung-hitungnya beneran nggak sih?
PS4 games.
Beneran,
And we
beneran.
have to ensure that
Oh,
the
iya,
architecture
gerak.
is easy for the developers to adopt. Now,
Saking-
backwards compatibility
saking
is
bosannya malah
handled
tim duluan
massively
aja.
by AMD. They treated it as a key need throughout the design
Lo nggak
process.
ngitungin
As
logo
our
PS ada
solution
berapa
to adding
tuh?
new features without blindsiding developers,
Cuman satu
we
kan
made
yang di
sure that if
podium.
there were new significant
Logo-
features,
logo button
it would
ya.
be optional to use them.
Tuh,
The GPU
dua,
supports ray
tiga.
tracing, but you don't have to use ray tracing to make your game. The
Dekor tuh.
GPU supports primitive shaders, but you can release your first game on PlayStation 5 without making any use of them. Before I get into the capabilities of the GPU, I'd like to make clear 2 points that can be quite confusing. First,
Oh,
we have a
menarik.
custom AMD GPU based on their RDNA 2 technology. What does that mean?
Mhm.
AMD is continuously improving and revising their tech. For RDNA 2, their goals were, roughly speaking, to reduce power consumption by re-architecting the GPU to put data close to where it's needed, to optimize the GPU for performance, and to add a new, more advanced feature set. But that feature set is malleable, which is to say that we have our own needs for PlayStation, and that can factor into what the AMD roadmap becomes. So collaboration is born. If we bring concepts to AMD that are felt to be widely useful, then they can be adopted into RDNA 2 and used broadly, including in PC GPUs. If the ideas are sufficiently specific to what we're trying to accomplish, like the GPU cache scrubbers I was talking about, then they end up being just for us. If you see a similar discrete GPU available as a PC card at roughly the same time as we release our console, that means our collaboration with AMD succeeded in producing technology useful in both worlds. It doesn't mean that we as Sony simply incorporated the PC part into our console. This continuous improvement in AMD technology means it's dangerous to rely on teraflops as an absolute indicator of performance, and CPU count should be avoided as well. In the
Kita
case
ngomongin
of
Battle Royale apa
CPUs, we
Plunder
all
nih?
understand this. The PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 5 each have 8 CPUs, but we never think that meant the capabilities and performance are equal. It's the same for CUs. For one thing, they've been getting much larger over time. Adding new features
Bisa kok cukup
means
kita
adding
satu game
lots of
habis itu ntar balik
transistors.
lagi ke sini.
In fact, the transistor count for a PlayStation 5 CU
Terus belum
is
kelar.
62% larger than the
Baru selesai
transistor
ngomongin
count for
AMD.
a PlayStation 4 CU. Second, the PlayStation 5 GPU is backwards compatible with PlayStation 4. What does that mean? One way you can achieve backwards compatibility is to put the previous console's chipset in the new console, like we did with some PlayStation 3s. But that's, of course, extremely expensive. A better way is to incorporate any differences in the previous console's logic into the new console's custom chips.
Pas di PS3, makanya
Even as
bisa.
the technology evolves, the logic and feature set that PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 4 Pro titles rely on is still available in backwards compatibility modes. One advantage of this strategy is that once backwards compatibility is in the console, it's in. It's not as if a cost down will remove backwards compatibility like it did on PlayStation 3. Achieving this unification of functionality took years of efforts by AMD, as any roadmap advancement creates a potential divergence in logic. Running PS4 and PS4 titles at boosted frequencies has also added complexity. The boost is truly massive this time around, and some game code just can't handle it. Testing has to be done on title by title basis. Results are excellent, though. We recently took a look at the top 100 PlayStation 4 titles as ranked by Playtime, and we're expecting almost all of them to be playable at launch on PlayStation. With regards to new features, as I said, our strategy was to try to break new ground, but at the same time not to require use of the new GPU capabilities. For more than a decade, GPUs have imposed backward gitu doang. Software enables vertex processing, but for the most part,
Backward satu gen.
responsible for the triangles and other geometry that the vertices form. That means
Ada suara robot nih. Nengganis ini bapak-bapak.
such as aborting
Merobot dia
vertex
suaranya.
if all geometry that uses it is off screen. PlayStation 5 has a new unit called the Geometry Engine, which brings handling of triangles and other primitives under
Geometry
full
Engine.
control. As a game developer, you're free to ignore its existence and use the PlayStation 5 GPU as if it were no more capable than the PS4 GPU. Or you can use this new intelligence in various ways. Simple usage could be performance optimization, such as removing back-faced or off-screen vertices and triangles. More complex usage involves something called primitive shaders, which allow the game to synthesize geometry on the fly as it's demanded. It's a brand new capability. Using primitive shaders on PlayStation 5 will allow for a broad variety of techniques, including smoothly varying level of detail, addition of procedural detail to close-up objects, and improvements to particle effects and other visual special effects. Another major new feature of our custom RDNA 2-based GPU is ray tracing, using the same strategy as AMD's upcoming PC GPUs.
Di chat jadi malah main penuh-penuhan stiker kan?
Saya tahu.
To use the intersection engine, first you build what is called
Bisa
an acceleration
nama.
structure. It's data in RAM that contains all of your
Terus
geometry.
kita ikutan gitu.
There's a specific set of formats.
Monggo.
There are variations on the same BVH concept. Then, in your shader program, you use a new instruction that asks the intersection engine to check a ray against the BVH. While the intersection engine is processing the requested ray triangle or ray box intersections, the shaders are free to do other work. Having said that, the ray tracing instruction is pretty memory intensive, so it's a good mix with logic-heavy code. There's of course no need to use ray tracing. PS4 graphics engines will run just fine on PlayStation 5. But it presents an opportunity for
Kayaknya tuh yang
those
nonton di
interested.
sana ngantuk juga nih.
I'm thinking it'll take
Yang di
less
depannya
than
dia
a
ya?
million rays to have a big impact on audio. That should be enough for audio occlusion and some reverb calculations. With a bit more of the GPU invested in ray tracing,
Wah ini sih
you
kalau
can
nggak ada
some very nice
desain refill sih.
Having said that, adding ray trace shadows
Kuciwa sekali, kuciwa sekali.
could easily take hundreds of
Outrage ini
millions
bentar
of rays a
lagi
second,
nih
and
kayaknya.
full ray tracing could take billions. How far can we go? I'm starting to get quite bullish. I've already seen
Ini
a
lagi ngomongin
PlayStation 5
ray
title
tracing
that's
secara teori ya.
successfully using ray tracing based reflections
Jenis
in
ray
complex
tracing.
animated scenes
Ray
with
tracing kan
only
banyak.
modest
Iya.
costs.
Dan
Another set
bedanya.
of issues for the GPU involved
Belum di
size,
refill, belum di
how
refill.
big do we make the GPU, and what
Apa itu?
frequency do we
TikTok.
This is
Main
about
TikTok
this.
tuh di
The chip
chat.
has a cost, and there's a cost for whatever we use to supply that chip.
Belum keluar. Desainnya tuh belum ada memang. Itu dia makanya tadi. Kalau sampai ini
Nggak ada.
Bisa nggak ada
possible
juga.
configurations for a GPU
Ya
roughly
sudah lah.
reflective of the
Gue nggak yakin
PlayStation
ada
4
sih ini.
Pro.
Gue iya
This
sih.
is a
Iya,
thought
aku juga
experiment. Don't
udah
take these
30
configurations
menit
too
kayak
seriously.
gini, ya udahlah.
If you just calculate
Kayaknya dia
teraflops, you
reveal
get the same
desainnya itu
number.
di
But
acara langsung
actually,
kayak gitu.
performance is
Iya,
noticeably
live.
different because teraflops is defined as the computational capability
Tapi
of the
lucu
vector
ya,
in
kayak
memory.
PS5 tuh
That's
ngasih
just
tahu
one part of the
spesifikasinya
GPU.
dulu, tapi belum
There
ngasih
are a
tahu
lot of other
bentuknya
units.
si
And
PS
those
kayak
other
gimana.
units
Iya.
all run faster when the GPU
Karena itu pengen
frequency is
ditunggu kan.
higher. At
Iya ya.
33% higher
Iya,
frequency,
visual.
rasterization
Penasaran
goes
gitu.
33% faster. Processing the command buffer
Aduh,
goes
kenapa jadi
that much faster.
kenapa
And
jadi main
L2
tebak-tebakan
and,
kan?
other cameras have that much higher bandwidth.
Itu yang main
and so
TikTok
on.
tuh siapa yang
About
menang?
the only downside of
Nggak
the
ada
system
menang,
memory
itu
is
error.
33% further away in terms of cycles. But the large number of benefits more than counterbalance that. As a friend of mine says, a rising tide lifts all boats. Also, it's easier to fully
Itu
use
PS5 jadi
36
tetap
CUs
buka
in parallel
laptop aja.
than it is to fully use 48 CUs. When triangles are small, it's much harder to fill all those CUs with useful work. So there's a lot to be said for faster, assuming you can handle the resulting power and heat issues, which frankly, we haven't always
Ada
done
dua.
the best job at. Part of the reason for that is, historically, our process for setting CPU and GPU frequencies has relied on some heavy-duty guesswork with regards to how much
ini
electrical
apa nih?
power games will consume
Oh,
and how
oke,
much
oke.
heat
Power
will be produced as a
consumption.
result.
Siapa
Nah.
namanya?
Menarik.
Power consumption varies a lot from game to game.
God of War
When I
paling
play
tinggi.
God of War on my PS4 Pro, I know the power consumption is high just by the fan noise. But power isn't simply about engine
Ini bow
quality.
itu apa sih?
It's
Ini ya?
about the
Siapa
minutia
namanya?
of what's being displayed
Horizon.
and how.
Horizon.
Horizon.
It's counterintuitive, but processing
Terus
dense
belakang
geometry
Horizon.
Kapak apa ya,
consumes
kapak?
less power than processing simple
Kapak God of War.
geometry, which is, I suspect,
iya.
why Horizon's map screen, with its low
Yang
triangle
pistol itu
count,
apa?
makes my PS4 Pro heat up so
Uncharted.
Red Dead harusnya.
Our process
Dead
on previous
Redemption.
consoles has been to try to guess what the maximum
masa Red
power
Dead
consumption during
Redemption
the
di
entire
bawah
console
Horizon?
lifetime might be, which is to say, the worst case scenario,
Tapi
the
mungkin
worst case
karena
scenario,
Guerrilla
prepare
Engine
for a
sorry,
solution that we
Decima
think will
Decima kan
require
lebih
zero
berat
power.
harusnya.
If we get it right, fan noise is minimal. If we get it wrong, the
Terus ada
console will be
Resident
quite
Evil.
loud for the higher power games, and
Terus
there's even a chance
sama
that it might
Hit ya?
overheat
Itu
and shut
Resident
down
Evil
if we
apa-
misestimate power too
Apa Days
badly.
Gone?
PlayStation 5 is especially challenging because the CPU supports 256-bit native instructions.
Wah, sampai ada Pak Tio. Halo Pak Tio, welcome to the watch party. Kita lagi nonton sama ini ya teman-teman dari
If we
AADG.
plan for major 256-bit instruction usage,
Nah,
we
kalau
need
udah
to set
open
the
beta
CPU
berarti
clock
yang lain juga
substantially
akhirnya
lower
sudah
or
ini ya.
noticeably
Or you
increase
saw
the
the
size of the power
design,
supply
please.
and fan.
Or if not,
So,
I go sleep.
after much discussion,
Tapi
we
kita
decided to go
ini dulu ya,
in a
kita
very different direction.
ngobrol dulu nih, ngobrol.
We built a GPU with 36
Congrats
CUs.
anyway.
Mind you,
Congrats.
RDNA2 CUs are large. Each has 62% more transistors than the CUs we were using on PlayStation 4. So if we compare transistor counts, 36 RDNA2 CUs equates to roughly 58 PlayStation 4 CUs. It is a fairly
Oh,
sizable
ini yang CU tadi nih.
Then we went
Iya,
with a
ini lagi
variable
ngomongin
frequency
dia
strategy
CU-nya
for
jadi bisa
PlayStation 5,
lebih
which is to say we
namanya?
continuously run the GPU and
Lebih sedikit.
CPU in boost
Lebih
mode.
banyak.
enggak, bukan
We supply a
lebih
generous
apa
amount of
ya,
electrical
jadi
power
lebih
cepat.
and then
efisien gitu
increase the
loh si
frequency of the GPU
PS5-nya.
and CPU until they reach the
CU ini
capabilities
CU.
of the system's
Intinya
cooling
sih
solution.
gitu, si
It's a
PS-nya jadi
completely
lebih
different
efisien
paradigm.
gitu
Rather
daripada
than running at
generasi
constant
sebelumnya.
frequency and letting power vary based on the workload, we run at essentially constant power and
Iya,
let
jadi
the
nggak
frequency
panas
vary
istilahnya
based
gitu.
on the workload. We then tackled the engineering challenge of a cost-effective and high-performance cooling solution designed for that specific power level. In some ways, it becomes a simpler
Kalau udah
problem
muncul
because
bangunin
there are
gue ya.
no more unknowns.
Gini-gini
Kamu
nih.
tidur gak akan bangun lagi,
Might have.
Bek, sampai
As for the
pagi.
details of the cooling solution, we're saving them for our teardown.
Halo,
I'm
Johannes.
happy with what
Welcome
the
back.
engineering team came up with. So, how fast can we run the GPU and CPU with this strategy? The simplest approach would be to look at the actual temperature of the silicon die and throttle the frequency on that basis. But that won't work. It fails
Bapaknya
to
nggak
create
aus
a
ya?
consistent PlayStation 5 experience. It would
Bapaknya udah training ini.
slower simply because it was wrong. So rather than look at the actual temperature of the silicon die, we look at the activities that the GPU and CPU are performing and set the frequencies on that basis, which makes everything deterministic and repeatable. While we're at it, we also use AMD's Smart Shift technology and send any unused power from the CPU to the GPU so it can squeeze out a few more pixels. The benefits of this strategy are quite large. Running a GPU at 2 gigahertz was looking like an unreachable target with the old fixed frequency strategy. With this new paradigm, we're able to run way over that. In fact, we have to cap the GPU frequency at 2.23 gigahertz so that we can guarantee that the on-chip logic operates properly. 36 CUs at 2.23 gigahertz is 10.3 teraflops, and we expect the GPU to spend most of its time at or close to that frequency and performance. Similarly, running the CPU at 3 gigahertz was causing headaches with the old strategy. But now we can run it as high as 3.5 gigahertz. In fact, it spends most of its
Bagaimana? Oh, kalau sorry, Xbox berarti berapa?
That doesn't mean all games will be running
12.
12.
2 kali lipatnya.
When that worst
yang
case game arrives, it will run at a lower clock speed, but not too much lower. To reduce power by 10%, it only takes a couple of percent reduction in frequency, so I'd expect any downclocking to be pretty minor.
PS5
All things
ini.
considered, the change to a variable frequency approach will show significant gains for
Iya, ntar
PlayStation
dia
gamers.
kalau
The
presentasi
final
di
of our 3
Tokyo
principles
Forum
was
kami
about
itu,
finding
Bareng
new
TED
dreams.
Talk.
It's important for us on the hardware team to find new ways to expand or deepen
Kesini
gaming,
lagi.
and that's what led us to a focus.
Akhirnya, iya, 3 principles loh ini.
Players, we experience
Men,
the
ini
game
satu
through the
SKS loh.
visuals, through audio.
40 menit ini.
We
Hah?
receive from the control,
Udah pada
such as
nyatet
rumble,
Ini nih, ujiannya ntar keluar loh, ujian loh.
dead without
UTS nih kan.
Visuals are,
Ini
of course,
terakhir quiz loh.
important, but the impact of audio is huge as well.
Terakhir kuis.
At the same time, the audio team on a game project has to do a lot with a little. For example, on PlayStation 4, there's fierce competition for the Jaguar CPU cores. Audio typically ends up getting just a fraction of a core. That's not much of a computational resource, particularly when you consider that the visuals run at 30 or 60 frames a second, but audio processing needs to happen at almost 200
Gimana nih? Kayaknya
times a
kata
second.
Pak Rizky Repsul
So,
benar nih.
it's been tough
Terjadi
going
nih.
making forward progress on audio,
Terjadi
FPS
apa?
5.
particularly
Flop.
when PlayStation 3 was such
Wow.
a
Wah, itu dia kata
Gara-gara
itu Bapak Rizky dari
Escambles
Repschool
themselves
berpendapat
were almost a
demikian
perfect
katanya.
device for audio rendering. Simple
Karena
pipelined
apa?
algorithms could really take advantage of asynchronous
Dia sempat
delay
bilang
and frequently reached 100%
apa ya
utilization of the
kemarin?
floating point unit.
Itu dibahas
There's
pas kita lagi di
unfortunately
PSA
nothing
itu.
comparable on PlayStation 4.
Oh,
Pas ngobrol-ngobrol di
Probably
situ.
the most dramatic progress in the
Kayaknya sih
PlayStation
PS5
generation
flop,
has been
dia
the
bilang gitu.
virtual reality. The PSVR hardware
Kayak
has its own audio
cenayang.
unit. It
Tapi
supports
belum
about
sih
50
sebenarnya.
Tapi kan respect dong, respect kan udah mengikuti perkembangan konsol dong kalau Bapak Rizky dong.
as well as
Iya
some
Oh iya
sih.
dong.
experience. Not to oversimplify, but
Apa ya
here
waktu itu
were our
penjelasan
goals
detailnya?
for audio
Lupa
on
nyatet tuh.
PlayStation 5.
Tapi dia ngasih dua
Audio
opini
for
pokoknya.
Not
Ini
just
dan
VR
ini gitu.
users or
Gue lupa.
soundbar owners or headphone users.
Mungkin
That
salah
meant
satunya
audio
Xbox
had to be part of the
itu
console.
lebih
It couldn't be
sekarang
a
lebih
peripheral.
sama
PS5 jadi tatakan
apa sih
laptop.
namanya?
Hundreds of sound sources.
Halo,
Gue lupa
Pandes.
We didn't want
nama
developers
teks,
to have
nama
to pick and
nama
choose
apa
what
kamu
sounds
dulu?
would get 3D effects and which wouldn't. We wanted every sound in
Pro
the game
console.
to have dimensionality.
Dengan
And finally, we
fitur-fiturnya
wanted
si
to
siapa
really
namanya,
take on the challenges of presence
si
and locality. Now,
si
when we
backward
say
compatibility
presence,
itu.
we mean the
Semua
feeling
game di
actually
gen
there.
sebelumnya tuh bisa
Enter
dimainin
the
di Series
matrix.
X, terus
It's
kayak
not,
lu
of
bisa
course, something we thought we could
lu bisa
perfectly achieve.
bisa
The idea
milih
was that if we
dengan
stopped
si siapa
using
namanya
just a
si
rain
fitur,
sound
aduh gue lupa
and
nama
instead
fiturnya apa.
use lots of 3D
Kayak
audio
lu
sources
terserah
for
lu beli satu
raindrops
game
hitting the
mau
ground
dimainin di
and all
Series X
sorts of
atau di
locations
Xbox One
around.
serah.
Smart
Jadi kayak lu
delivery.
nggak
Iya,
perlu-
iya, iya.
Iya.
Bener. Gue summary dulu nih buat yang baru datang nih. Jadi dari tadi itu cuman baru bahas pertama principles itunya kayak core dalamnya, which is pakai SSD. Terus habis itu yang kedua backward compatibility sama satu lagi apa tadi? Evolution. Intinya sih semua teknis intinya itu.
Iya semuanya
To use
teknis ya
Dead
tadi.
Space as an example, I know.
Tapi yang
old school.
bikin
You're
wow
fighting
itu
enemies in
10
fairly
teraflopsnya.
dark
10
Orang kayak,
teraflops.
apa? 10
Back in the
teraflops
day,
doang
if you
gitu.
played the game using the TV speaker,
Yang mana-
Buat di live
tell
chat
that there was
sih.
one
Iya,
last
yang
yang mana kalah ya, yang mana kalah dari
Yang mana
Xbox
kalah
Series
dari
X.
Xbox.
With headphones, you could tell that the enemy was somewhere on the right, which led you to
Backward
deduce
compatibility nggak sampai PS1 ya, kalau sejauh tadi sih.
Iya.
PS4
Iya
doang dari
sih.
tadi.
But with 3D
Kalau
audio
lihat dari
with
logo-logonya ya,
locality, the
soalnya
idea
kan
is
dia
you
nggak
want
Soalnya dia
jelas.
lumayan spesifik tadi kan, PS3 backwardnya ke PS2. Terus pas logo PS5 muncul, cuman ada PS4 Pro doang tuh sama PS4 biasa.
Well,
Terus
all
dia
those
juga dia sempat
bumps
bilang
and
kayak
folds
kita
Hin
perlu
banget, hin
hal yang
banget.
sama
evolutionarily speaking,
dengan
based on
kayak
what
di
direction the
setiap
sound is coming
generasi
from,
kita
sound
ilangin
waves
satu
bouncing
Iya,
around.
generasi pas
Here,
generasi pas
there's some
backward
constructive and
compatibility.
destructive interference, and the result is a change in volume. The phase of the sound also shifts, depending on what path the sound wave took to reach the ear canal. These volume
Ini
changes
tentang apa
and
ngomongin
phase
refreshing
shifts
audio
are
ya?
different for each direction and also
Iya.
vary depending on the frequency.
Karena
of the
tadi
sound.
udah sempat jual
Head
ini
size
dia,
and head shape
3D
also
audio.
impact the sound.
Pas pertama kan dibilang bakal
The
ada.
way that the sound changes based on
I see.
direction and frequency can be encoded in a table called the head-related transfer function, or HRTF. Here's part of one. The vertical axis is the frequency.
Wow.
Sebenarnya saya sih Pak Elf, karena
The color gives the
Ini
degree
yang
of
merah-merah
attenuation of the
ini ya,
sound at
namanya
that frequency.
asal-asal kentut gitu kan panas.
HRTF is
Heat
actually
detector.
unique to an individual.
Hit detector kan
In fact,
luar
you're
biasa.
looking at mine right now. Here's how we measure an HRTF. We've taken hundreds of
Nah, jadi di sini siapa yang berminat beli PS5? Sejujurnya saya. Oh, aja.
right ear canals. And then sit the subject down in the middle of an array of 22 speakers. We then play an
Karena
audio
udah ngelewatin
sweep from
PS4
each speaker
aja sih
as we
sebenarnya.
rotate the subject. In the course of 10 or 20 minutes, we're able to sample the HRTF at over 1,000 locations.
Ada apa FIFA
Using
2021?
HRTF for
Ada
rendering
apa?
audio creates unparalleled quality, but it's
Ada tahun baru.
computationally expensive.
Ada game baru.
The simplest way to use an HRTF is to process a sound source to make it appear as if it's coming from one of those 1,000 locations we sample.
Di sini nggak ada emoji
Unfortunately,
kayak
the
di
processing has to be
Twitch-nya.
done in frequency
Adanya di
domain
Discord.
rather than time domain, so there's multiple
Harusnya ada loh.
transforms needed for every
Harusnya
sound
di
source, for every
ini
audio
bisa.
source. That's a lot.
Tumben nggak keluar.
This computational complexity was the determining factor for our strategy. It meant we had to bite the bullet and design and build a custom hardware unit for 3D
Wow,
audio.
udah makin banyak ini
Collectively, we're referring to
gambar-gambarnya
the
kayak
hardware
grafik,
unit and the
grafik,
proprietary
Bebek.
algorithms we
audio
run on it
gimana.
as Tempest 3D Audio Tech. The meaning of 3D audio and technology should be pretty obvious here. As for Tempest, I feel it really reflects our goals with audio. It suggests a certain intensity of experience and also hints at your presence within it. We're calling the hardware unit that we
BTW,
built the
GameStack-nya
Tempest engine.
Xbox udah
It's
live
based
juga.
on AMD's
Jadi
GPU
kita nonton
technology.
GameStack aja
We
lah ya.
modified a compute unit in such a way as to make it very close to the SPUs in PlayStation 3.
Oke,
Remember
ini
when I
apa?
said that they were
GPU
ideal for
parallelism
audio?
and
So,
XPU
the
like.
Tempest engine has no caches, just like an SPU. All
Masih-
data
Tetap di
processes
audio
via
kan?
DMA.
Tetap bahasan audio.
Audio tech.
Our target was that it would have more power than a CPU, thanks to the parallelism that a GPU can achieve, and that it would be
SPU
more
tuh kalau nggak
efficient than our
salah
GPU,
namanya-
thanks to the SPU-like architecture. The goal being to make possible near 100% utilization of the CU's vector units. Where we ended up is a unit with roughly the same SIMD power and bandwidth as all 8 Jaguar cores in the PlayStation 4 combined. If we were to use the same algorithms as PSVR, that's enough for something like 5,000
Ini ada
sound
Damn, man.
orang di
But of
YouTube
course,
bilang,
we want to use more complex
Ada orang
algorithms,
di
and we
YouTube
don't
bilang,
need anything like
dia
that
udah ngomong
of
46
sounds.
menit, yang aku ingat cuma 10 kok.
It would have
10.3
been wonderful
teraflop.
if a simpler strategy, such as using Dolby Atmos
Say.
peripherals, could have achieved our goals, but we wanted 3D audio for all, not just those with licensed sound.
Ini
bars.
orang-orang yang di depan nih
Also,
placementnya
we wanted
beneran
many
cuma ada
hundreds of
5
sound
orang tuh
sources,
kayaknya.
not just the 32 that have.
Di depan dia nih.
Itu
And finally, we
template.
wanted to be able to
template.
throw
Oh, itu
an
template ya?
overwhelming amount of
Itu
processing
template
at
ya?
the problem. And it wasn't clear
Kelihatannya
what
iya.
peripheral might have inside of it. In fact, with the Tempest engine, we've even got enough power that we can allocate some to the games,
Coba
to the
ikut
extent
tadi ya.
that games want to make use of
Template.
convolution reverb and other algorithms that are either
Lihat banget.
computationally
Di
expensive or
Google.
even higher.
Template.
But the primary
Aduh.
purpose of the Tempest engine
People.
remains 3D audio.
Setting.
Now, 3D audio is a
Conference.
major academic research topic. It's safe to say that no one in the world has all of the answers.
ASMR.
And the set of algorithms that has to be
Dari tadi
invented
banyak
to
itu komen-komennya
implement to
ASMR.
realize our vision
Iya.
for 3D audio is immense. For example, use of HRTF
Tapi ya sih, ini
is quite
tuh
complex.
sebenarnya buat
Before, I
developer
talked
sih,
about
bukan
making
buat
sound
Iya
gamer
sih.
sih.
waves appear as if it's coming from one of those 1,000 HRTF sample locations. But for high
Kayaknya
quality
mereka
Men,
salah
iya,
we
iya, iya.
have to handle other possibilities.
Tetap saja yang
The
nonton
sound source
600.000
might not be
sekarang.
at one of the 1,000
Iya.
HRTF sample locations.
Iya, iya,
So we
iya.
have to blend the
Kita lihat besok Twitter
HRTF
kayak
data
rame
from the
nih.
closest locations.
Kayaknya
Rame
rame.
meme sih bener tadi Kazu bilang tuh. Rame meme ini.
Very special handling as that blend keeps changing.
Gimana ada
and
sampai
that can
mana?
cause
Nggak sampai
phase
mana-mana
artifacts
sih.
in the resulting audio. Or the sound source might have a size to it,
Sampai
audio. Flex,
which
ya.
it feels if it's coming from an area rather than a single point.
Kita udah sampai
There's
di
also
mana
whole
audio itu tuh
categories of approaches
mengelilingi
to be
kita.
handled.
Betul, betul. Audio surround 3D.
Iya, surround 3D
But
sama
alternatively, ambisonics can be
RDNA,
used for 3D audio.
CPU, kali
Ambisonics
X
speaks
di
about
akar
like
2
the
kuadrat.
spherical harmonics
Bodoh
used in
amat.
computer graphics. And finally, there's audio
Tidak ada
devices.
informasi
The player might be
dimundurin
using
atau tidak,
headphones,
Pak
TV
Flix.
speakers,
Tidak ada.
Have a higher end surround sound setup with 6
Belum,
or more
belum.
speakers, all of which need
Jadi mundur
different
PS5.
approaches. That's a
Keren
lot
Atau
of
kita nonton
variation.
mundur aja gimana?
It's nice to have the computational resources of the Tempest engine, but it's clear that achieving our ultimate goals with 3D audio is going to be a multi-year, step-by-step process. Having said that, headphone audio implementation is largely complete at this time. It was a natural place for us to start. With headphones, we control exactly what each ear hears, and therefore the
Oh, man.
algorithmic development and
Dia bakal jelasin
implementation
ini.
are more straightforward. For TV speakers and stereo speakers, we're in the process of
Wah.
implementing virtual
Jelasin
surround.
apa?
Ini sih.
The idea being that
Ini
if you're
audio
sitting in a
device
sweet
TV
spot in
speaker
front of
and
the TV,
headphone
then the sound
functionality.
feels if it's coming from any direction, even though
Men,
virtual surround sound has a lot in common
Bener,
with 3D
kayaknya
audio
men.
headphones, but
Sampai
it's more
dev pun juga
complex
kayaknya nggak
because
usah dijelasin.
the left
Iya
ear
juga,
is
bener
the
kan?
speaker and vice versa. We have a basic implementation of virtual surround sound up and running. We're now looking at increasing the size of that sweet spot, which is to say, making the area you need to be in to feel the 3D effect larger. And we're also working to boost the sense of locality. Headphone audio is the current gold standard for 3D audio on PlayStation 5, but we're going to see what we can do to bring virtual surround sound to a similar level, after which we'll start
Ini kayak
moving
orang
on to
nambah-nambahin
other
teori
sources,
penulisan
such as
deskripsi
channels.
biar tebel.
It's now to the point where some of the PlayStation 5 games in development
Gua rasa
are
sih
using these systems.
Dia
One of the game
dia
demos
ngasih
allows you
tahu
to toggle
dia
between
ngasih tahu
conventional
sejarahnya
PlayStation 4
AMD.
style stereo
Brief
audio
sih,
and our new
gimana ya?
3D audio. I listened with just an ordinary pair of
Tapi ini
over-the-ear headphones.
semenjak
and
GDC
wow,
diundur,
I could feel
semua
a difference.
gamer tuh
3D
ya
audio has that
bisa
dimensional
enjoy
feel to it.
live session.
Conventional stereo audio feels smashed flat by comparison. The improvement is obvious. So,
Dimension
a big
feel,
advancement.
oke.
But
Yeah.
have I entered the Matrix? Does my brain believe I'm
Ini nih, jadi dari tadi udah tuh bener kan sambil warjon
Well, the answer is
udah
no.
dikompor-komporin nih kita nih. Mending main terus balik ke sini gitu ya.
Whose HRTF was being used. It wasn't mine. It was the default HRTF. The audio team analyzed the hundreds that they measured and chose the one they felt was the closest to the total
Si
gain.
pendeteksi kentut lagi nih.
This shows a piece of the default HRTF.
Udah mulai nggak peduli.
On the right, you can see that the general features are much the same, but the details are quite different. With the default HRTF, as I said,
iGloomy
the 3D
tidak,
audio
tidak.
sounds
Anda
pretty
tidak
good.
ketinggalan
When I
apapun.
use my
Tenang.
HRTF, though, the audio
Bisa
has
dirangkum.
a higher level of
Ini
realism,
ketinggalan
which is to
1
say
jam gara-gara
that when
nugas.
using
Kalau
headphones
lain,
and my
sini lagi nugas
HRTF,
juga nih.
I
Ini nugas juga,
occasionally
betul.
confirm that
Ini
even
kuliah
though the
online
sound
juga
is
loh.
coming
Ini
from the
kuliah
real world,
Jangan
Online
sampai
kok,
otaknya
online.
terbakar nih.
A corollary to this is that there are a few people whose HRTFs are sufficiently far from the default HRTF, that's the red dot here, that they can toggle between PS4 style and PS5 style audio and not sense much difference. I've had a few people describe the PlayStation 5's 3D audio as sounding like a bit better stereo audio. Presumably they're the ones at the very edges of this diagram. Which means what HRTF you're using is key.
Belum
I'd
ada
like
baru
everyone
duel.
to be able to experience what I'm experiencing, but obviously it's not possible to measure the HRTF of every PlayStation user. That means HRTF selection and synthesis are going to be big topics going forward as the Tempest
Ternyata ini konsepnya
technology
sama loh sama 6
matures.
tahun yang lalu.
At PlayStation 5
Judul
launch,
video
we'll be
juga sama.
offering a choice
The
of
Road to
5
PS4
iya.
gitu ya.
There's
Oh,
a
nice check,
single
nice check, nice check. Ini
aspect
kayaknya
of the one
info-info
which
gini
you
lebih penting gitu.
That's just the
Trivia,
first
trivia.
step, though. This is an
Trivia.
open-ended
Ayo kasih lagi trivia dong.
Kasih
Bel.
trivia, kasih trivia. Biar bangun, biar bisa ini sedikit nih.
Neural network to pick the
Dan kalau
closest
di PS4
HRTF
itu
in our library. Maybe you'll be
Durasinya
sending us a
47
video
menit.
of your ears.
Waduh, ini luar biasa. Ini
Ini
mungkin
udah berapa nih?
Maybe
ini
you'll play
52
an
menit.
audio game to tune the HRTL. It'll be
lewat.
subtly changing as
47
you
menit
play
ya. Jadi
and home in on the HRTL
dua,
that gives you the
pada
highest score,
tanggal
meaning that it
Juni
matches you the best.
29 Juni 2013
This is a journey
itu
we'll
di
all
game
be
lab
taking together over the next
2000
few years.
Max
Ultimately,
Army
we're
juga
committing
dia
to
ngobrol
enabling everyone to
tentang
experience
Growth
that
2.
next level of realism.
Dan nggak
Hopefully,
ada
I've been able to
reveal
illustrate a
desain.
bit about our design and
Tau gak
decision-making
sih dulu
process today,
aku tuh
and why
keingetnya tuh
PlayStation 5
kayak
has the feature set that it does.
gini
Now
juga,
comes the fun.
cuman
We
dia
get to
tuh
see how the
kayak
development
PS2 gitu
community takes
loh.
advantage
Jadi
of that feature set. I'm
si
hoping
dev
that
dari
completely
PS2-nya tuh
unexpected.
kayak
Will it come from
nunjukin
audio,
kita
ray
tuh
tracing,
bisa
the
render
capabilities of
3D
the
gitu,
SSD,
keren
or
banget, terus
something else?
ngeliatin
I
air
guess we'll
mancur,
find out.
ngeliatin
Oh iya, gue pernah nonton itu.
Thank you for your time
Liatin
today.
pernah kan? Tapi keren, ada visual-visualnya.
Di gitu doang.
Oke deh.
Bener kan? Sama konsepnya.
Wah, wah.
Santai.
Terus habis itu auto keputer PS5 event announcement, here's what to expect ya.
Oke. Gue juga ke autoplay yang lain.
Tanda tanya.
Thanks for coming to my TED Talk.
Aduh, thanks for coming to
itu
his
tuh-
TED Talk.
Itu tuh orang template, udah masa nggak ada tepuk-tepuknya pas terakhir?
Nggak ada tepuk-tepuk.
Wah, F.
Nggak ada tepuk tangan.
Oke deh, kalau gitu reaksi saya cuma ada satu ya. Fucek. Ini fucek ini semua. Fucek ini.
Penonton kecewa.
Lihat live chatnya YouTube lucu.
Aduh. Yaudah gimana ini?
Jadi intinya
Oke,
adalah
intinya.
10 teraflops.
10 teraflops. Kalau dibanding sama Xbox
12.
12.
Iya.
Tapi
dari
BTW
SSD gede ya?
dari SSD gede, aku pengen nanya dong.
Cepet.
Nah,
Aku nih nggak kurang paham nih. Kenapa sih teraflops matter gitu loh? Coba.
itu tadi di teraflops itu pas bahas chip ya.
Iya.
GPU-nya.
GPU.
Saya
Pada
tidak
nggak
mengerti
nyatet,
sih.
kan?
Nggak nyat, nih pada nggak nyatet nih
Pada
kan
nggak
kuliahnya. Jadi ternyata
Kalian yang nonton, ada yang nyatet
Betul.
juga nggak ya? Mungkin ada yang nyatet bisa kasih tahu ke kita.
Pinjem catatannya.
tapi bedanya dari PS4 jauh kan flopnya. Nah, kalau
Iya
PS4
sih.
PS4 jauh.
harus trace back ke video PS4 yang setahun lalu. Berapa tahun lalu tuh Pak Abel tadi menemukan? 6 tahun lalu.
6 tahun
Iya.
yang lalu.
Mau ditunjukin aja, Pak. Itu enaknya
Waduh, Kita
bervisual.
nonton 47 menit lagi. Jadi gimana? Ini SSD lebih kenceng. Dari sisi SSD lebih kenceng dari PS5, dari Xbox. Tapi dari sisi teraflop lebih lebih lemah dari Series X. Terus sama apa
Beda
lagi
2
tadi?
teraflops.
Beda 2 teraflop. Terus sama
Dan ini orang yang samanya yang presentasi ya. Oke.
Sama, iya orang yang
Sama.
sama.
Dia emang lead desainernya si PlayStation.
Dari lama iya, oke.
Nah, kan istri saya datang menanyakan harganya berapa kan? Ini dia nih.
Karena ini mempengaruhi masa depan keluarga kita.